The Jets begin to put the full court press on Aaron Rodgers, while another option emerges at quarterback in Lamar Jackson. We're talking the latest developments in the search for a new Jets quarterback today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Tuesday, March 7th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GettingGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free, and it's available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source and like the show, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube and like the show, please give this episode a big thumbs up. This helps the channel out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Well, it was an eventful Tuesday in the Jets' search for a new quarterback. Very early in the morning on Tuesday, the news broke, and it was not the person you would expect who would break the story. It's Trey Wingo, a guy you may remember from his days at ESPN, on SportsCenter, on NFL Live. It was Trey Wingo who broke the story that the Jets had spoken with Aaron Rodgers on Monday night. And the timing of this, of course, is no surprise. As you probably know by now, on Monday, Derek Carr, who was the other primary option for the Jets at quarterback, at least finding a proven veteran quarterback, reached a deal with the New Orleans Saints, and that essentially left Aaron Rodgers as the top option for the New York Jets, really the only option that has their focus. And I guess if you were following the Carr saga, you could say maybe Rodgers was the only real option for the Jets the whole time. So Rodgers and the Jets had spoken, and things continued. Reports continued to break during Tuesday that Rodgers and the Jets were continuing to speak, and Tuesday night, the Jets and Rodgers met up in California. So talks are ongoing. Now, there are a couple of notable things here. Obviously, the Jets talking to Aaron Rodgers is a notable thing, but also the fact that the player, Rodgers, and the team, the Jets, are speaking is an indication that the Packers have given the Jets permission to speak with Aaron Rodgers. And why is this significant? Well, we haven't really known what direction the Packers were going to go in this offseason. And while there's no rule that when you allow a player to speak with another team that you necessarily have to trade him, odds are you would not let a player speak with another team unless you were seriously considering moving on from that player. And the reports on the Packers and Rodgers have been all over the place. There were some reports a few weeks back that the Packers were ready to move on. There have been other reports that the Packers have been willing to welcome him back. There have been some reports somewhere in the middle where the Packers would be willing to welcome him back under certain conditions. So the fact that the Packers allowed the Jets to speak with Rodgers is certainly notable. And at this point in time, of course, there may have been things were not informed of behind the scenes. At this point in time, it appears that Aaron Rodgers has only spoken with the New York Jets, and that could obviously change in the future. The Packers could give other teams permission, but the fact that the two sides are talking is at least an indicator that there's something here. There's something that seriously could happen. It could happen in the next few days. And on Monday's show, I expressed my fear that Aaron Rodgers was just going to drag the Jets along, and maybe this is an indication that that's not going to happen. I have a lot of different feelings about this Aaron Rodgers thing. I have very, very big concerns about the price, and I think that something needs to be worked out here, both in terms of the compensation the Jets would have to give Green Bay and Rodgers' contract. I think that the price has to get much lower for Rodgers to make sense for the Jets. But the fact that they're talking perhaps indicates that maybe my concerns about Rodgers dragging the Jets along all offseason, and listen, if you've followed Rodgers the last 2 to 3 years in the offseason, you know it's been an adventure. And it's probably going to be if he's on the Jets in 2023, that it's going to be an adventure in 2024, that he's going to drag the decision out, he's going to do everything in his power to get attention. But if nothing else, maybe this is a sign that hopefully we'll get some sort of resolution to this thing. Now, I think another thing that maybe has flown under the radar here is the fact the Jets are talking to Rodgers means that they have to do this. They have to do a selling job. They have to sell Rodgers on coming to New York, on joining their franchise. And we don't know how good of a selling job the Jets will do. We don't know whether they can convince him. Now, listen, I think the Jets want to get this done immediately. I think the Jets, for reasons I've mentioned, they don't want this thing dragging on. But beyond that, they want Rodgers to commit because they want to be able to focus on the rest of their offseason. And they also don't want another team to jump in. I said this yesterday that with Carr gone, the Jets really did not have a credible plan B. And when that happens, you give a lot of leverage away in these negotiations. You give it to Rodgers, you give it to the Packers. Both of them, if they both know that you need to trade for Aaron Rodgers, or at least you feel like you need to trade for Aaron Rodgers, it makes it more difficult on your end because instead of lowering the price, the Packers can say, hey, we know you need him. We're not low. We may ask for more. And Rodgers, in particular, a guy who has threatened retirement, a guy who's talked about how he's not sure whether he wants to continue playing, as ridiculous, as bad as his contract is now, and it's not a good contract. It could get even worse if he says, I'm only coming to you if you give me a bonus, if you bump up my salary. The one edge the Jets may have, though, is if there's no other team that's interested right now, because that's like the one saving grace the Jets could have, because if Rodgers wants to continue playing, then that gives the Jets a little bit more leverage. If the Packers want to get rid of Rodgers, again, it gives the Jets a little bit more leverage in a situation where the Jets have, I'm not sure, played their hand all that well and put themselves in a really tough spot where it seems like if they don't get Rodgers, whatever their plan was just has not worked out, and they're really back to the drawing board, potentially without another option. So lots of different elements here, and ultimately a lot of this is going to come down to how good of a sales job the Jets can do. I've said this over the last few weeks that we've heard a lot about the Packers possibly moving on from Rodgers. We've heard a lot about Rodgers possibly moving on from the Packers. We've heard a lot about the Jets' interest in Rodgers. The question is whether Rodgers is actually interested in the Jets. And that's something that probably will not be answered in the days ahead. And if you're Rodgers, I think you have every incentive to try and wait a little bit here. Now, I've expressed my fear that Rodgers is going to drag this out for months. Even if he doesn't do that, and I don't think Rodgers should do that, I think taking a couple days to think it over makes sense for him. I think waiting to see if another team emerges on the horizon, because sometimes what happens is the first team expresses his interest and then another team gets involved. So if you're Rodgers, it's the more teams that are interested in you, the better it is for Aaron Rodgers. And the opposite is true of the Jets. The Jets I imagine the Jets are trying to close this deal before they leave Rodgers. And I'm not sure whether that's necessarily realistic, but the Jets certainly want to get this done, in part because they want to understand what their salary structure is going to be, because guess what? We're 1 week away from the start of free agency, and the Jets need to figure out some moves to open up some cap space, but they also need to figure out how much money they're going to have to deal with. And if they're bringing Rodgers aboard on a $60 million contract, how they approach the rest of their off seasons could be very different opposed to if they get somebody who's cheaper, if they get somebody in the $20 to $30 million range. First of all, you'll have more money to play with if you get somebody in the $20 to $30 million range, but also presumably you'll need that money because you won't have a quarterback who can carry the load as much as Aaron Rodgers can, or at least you'd like Aaron Rodgers to, in theory, if he gets back to being the dominant player he's been in the past. So lots of different elements here, and I guess the one takeaway is that my fear that I mentioned on Monday about Rodgers dragging this thing out, the Jets at least now have permission, and you'd think that they'd at least be able to get a sense of whether Rodgers is really genuinely interested. And apparently it's the whole crew that's going out to speak with Rodgers on Tuesday night. Nathaniel Hackett's obviously part of that mix, because we know that part of the reason the Jets hired Nathaniel Hackett as their offensive coordinator is his relationship with Rodgers. It was pretty transparent. I don't think it was the only reason. In fact, I think you could even say that Robert Saleh knew Nathaniel Hackett. He knew he wanted to work with Nathaniel Hackett. Nathaniel Hackett's a friend. Nathaniel Hackett's somebody he trusted. But maybe the way he sold it to the owner, Woody Johnson, was saying, hey, this guy's really tight with Aaron Rodgers. Maybe this is the guy who can help us land Rodgers. Well, we're going to test this theory out. I've been skeptical of the theory, but I've been known to be wrong at times in the past. So we'll see. Maybe this is a situation where I'm wrong. If you're a Jets fan who wants Aaron Rodgers, I certainly would be happy for you if I was wrong. I need to see more about the deal the Jets eventually strike with Green Bay, though, because there's still a lot out there. There's still a lot that needs to be worked out in terms of compensation, in terms of what the requirements of Rodgers would be, and in terms of what Rodgers would get from the Jets. So we'll see what happens. Sometimes these deals can come together quickly. Not sure what's going to happen as we look forward between the Jets and Aaron Rodgers, but there is another big name who's now on the market, and that's Lamar Jackson. The Ravens made a somewhat surprising move as they gave Jackson the franchise tag. Even though he's franchised, he could potentially be available. How does that work? Well, I'll explain as we continue on this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. This episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm not even going to begin to guess which team Aaron Rodgers is going to end up. I'm not even going to begin to guess what team Lamar Jackson ends up with. We're in NFL offseason mode, but the NBA season's in full swing, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. So just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and even threes drained. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet of up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms. It's all quarterbacks all the time for the New York Jets. That's been the focus of the last couple of days. Derek Carr signs with the Saints. The Jets get permission to speak with Aaron Rodgers. But there's another potential development on the horizon, and it deals with the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson. Now, you probably saw in the news that on Tuesday, the Ravens put the franchise tag on Lamar Jackson. And you may think, well, that's over. It's over. He's franchised, right? Well, not necessarily. You may not know this, but there are actually two types of franchise tags in the NFL. There's one that's the exclusive franchise tag, and then there's also what's known as a non-exclusive franchise tag. Well, what do these mean? The exclusive franchise tag is more expensive. It's a one-year contract for a player, and it's still a pretty good deal for a player. The exclusive tag, though, means that the player has no recourse. He cannot go anywhere else. There's a cheaper option. It's the non-exclusive franchise tag. And that means it's for a little bit less money, so that's the benefit. The trade-off, though, is that the player actually does have the right to seek offers from other teams. Now, normally this does not come into play. And the reason for that is anybody who's got a player who's that good, they usually just put the exclusive tag on him so he can't go anywhere else. The non-exclusive tag sometimes is placed on players, but those players, even though they technically have the right to seek offers from other teams, seldom do. And it's mainly because other teams aren't going to give them offers. Why is that? Well, essentially, when you get the non-exclusive tag, you, for all intents and purposes, are a restricted free agent. And that means you can go seek offers from other teams, but let's say you sign a 5-year contract with Philadelphia. Your original team has a chance to match that offer. And then essentially, if they choose to match that offer, you stay with your original team on that 5-year deal that you signed with Philadelphia. Here's the catch, though. If your original team chooses to not match the offer, with the non-exclusive franchise tag, in this scenario, Philadelphia would have to give the original team 2 first-round picks. So ultimately, anybody you'd be willing to trade 2 first-round picks for probably doesn't make it to free agency to begin with. But if they get the franchise tag, if the guy's so good that he's going to get 2 first-round picks, you're probably putting the exclusive tag on him, so he doesn't even have the option. So this could be something. I can't remember the last time a player in the NFL got a non-exclusive franchise tag and actually got an offer from a new team. But that's essentially the scenario right now. Lamar Jackson, when free agency begins, will be free to seek out offers from new teams, even though he's got the franchise tag. And that's because the Ravens put the non-exclusive tag on him. It's a surprise. I thought the Ravens for sure were going to put the exclusive tag on him. It's an open question why they did it. I mean, there are plenty of different scenarios you can lay out there. Maybe they don't think Lamar is going to get as big of an offer as Lamar is expecting. So maybe after this acrimony of trying to reach out a new contract, they want him to go around the league, and then when he doesn't get the offer he's expecting, he comes back to Baltimore, and the Ravens can say, see, we knew that offer wasn't out there for you. Maybe they're trying to bait a team into offering. Maybe they want the 2 first-round picks. It's interesting. But Jackson is now available. And also interesting, there were a lot of teams that immediately said they don't have interest. And that's a lot of media reporters, a lot of beat writers, some national writers. I mean, team after team after team has come out and said they're not interested in Lamar Jackson. We'll see whether that's true or not. I mean, there are a couple different possibilities. The first possibility is everybody could have been lying to them. You tend to tell the media lies right before free agency begins because you don't want everybody to know what you're going to do. But it's also possible that NFL teams have this unwritten rule that you just don't sign players who have been franchised by other teams. So there are these unwritten rules in the NFL. Now we have not really had a test case like this out there to see whether teams actually are willing to sign a player on the franchise tag. But Lamar Jackson's now available, and I mean, look, he's 26 years old. He's a guy who's clearly a top quarterback in this league. And, I think he's got to be an option for the Jets. I mean, if the Jets are looking for a proven franchise quarterback, well, isn't Lamar Jackson the guy, former league MVP? Should they not be interested in him? I mean, if you're interested in 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers, you got a 26-year-old former league MVP who's available, who's, going to require a good contract. Yeah, he's going to require 2 first-round picks, but he's there. And listen, I understand that, the other aspect of this is that the Ravens completely restructured their team around Lamar Jackson. And they built a very unconventional roster. They built a very unconventional offensive system to take advantage of Lamar Jackson's ability as a runner. And they brought in Greg Roman, who, for all of his faults as a coordinator, is probably the best, for my money, the best run game coach, best run game offensive architect the NFL has seen in the last couple of decades. I mean, he really does some stuff that you don't see elsewhere. Lots of NFL teams, I mean, almost every NFL team has a very, very basic run game playbook. You see a lot of variety in the passing game, but for the most part in the NFL, teams run the same handful of run plays. It's not very creative, and I don't know if you'd call it creative, but Roman adds a lot more variety. And when you have a quarterback like Lamar Jackson, it helps to add in those extra wrinkles in your run game. Baltimore has also built its offense around the tight ends. They have a solid tight end group. They have not built so much around the wide receiver position. So you look at the Jets, who have a very good young receiver in Garrett Wilson, and tight ends who just can't do anything right. I mean, I know there's probably some Tyler Conklin or CJ Uzama fans out there, and I don't want to act like I'm giving up on young Jeremy Ruckert yet, who's only been in the league 1 year and still, of course, has a chance to become a player in this league. But let's just put it this way. Tight end is not a strength of the Jets. It's one of the weakest tight end groups in the league. It's a very expensive tight end group. Unfortunately, it's only paid well. It's not very good. And, so Lamar Jackson, a quarterback who's been more comfortable throwing to his tight ends than wide receivers in his career, you may have to rework some things. I think it's also fair to wonder, with Nathaniel Hackett in the mix, do the Jets have the coaching staff who could make the most out of Lamar Jackson? These are fair points, and, there's an argument to be made that a quarterback who depends on his legs maybe won't age quite as well as somebody who, makes his living purely in the pocket, although I think a lot of the stuff around Lamar Jackson as a passer is not. I think Lamar Jackson is a good passer. I think that there's a lot of bad takes out there on Lamar Jackson's passing ability. Lamar Jackson can throw the football. He may be a dynamic runner, but he can also throw the football a bit. I think it's fair to wonder, do the Jets have the coaching staff to maximize Lamar Jackson? That said, though, again, quarterback in his mid-20s, former league MVP, he's available. And I also think, we talked about the way the Jets are constructed. How about an offense where either Lamar Jackson or Breece Hall is carrying the football on 60% of the plays? How about an offense where not just that, you're essentially deciding after the snap, you're having Lamar Jackson scan the defense and deciding whether it's better for him or Breece Hall to carry the ball. Essentially, then you're getting two of the most talented runners in the league getting the ball in a favorable situation, because Lamar Jackson can scan the defense and either keep it or hand it off to Breece Hall, depending on what the defense looks like, and you essentially take the most favorable situation. So I think the Jets should be involved with Lamar Jackson. I think that if he's available, and I'm a big draft pick guy. Listen, I am Mr. Hold on to your draft picks, but for a quarterback like this, I don't think 2 first-round picks is that big of a price to pay. What will the Jets do, though? Will they focus more on Aaron Rodgers? Will they change their mind now that Lamar Jackson's available? What should they do? Well, I'll tell you what I think as we continue this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast ahead on the show. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Tuesday. We're talking quarterbacks. One big name has been linked with the Jets for months now. That's Aaron Rodgers. The Jets are meeting with Aaron Rodgers on Tuesday. They started speaking with him on Monday. But another big name has emerged, and that's Lamar Jackson. Now, the reports that we've gotten, Connor Hughes of SNY has said that the Jets view Jackson as a fallback plan, which means that, their focus is on Rodgers, and it kind of seems like they would only turn to Jackson in a scenario where they struck out on Rodgers in the next week or so. Now, Jackson is still technically not a free agent, technically not allowed to speak to teams until until free agency begins next week. There is one caveat, though, is that the Ravens can make him available to speak with other teams if they wanted to expedite the process. So there's a lot that's unknown right now, and a lot of this is up to Baltimore, not on the Jets' control. And part of this is we don't know what Baltimore thinks. I've been spending the last couple of months saying I'm not sure what the Packers are going to do. Well, same goes with the Ravens. We don't know what Baltimore's really thinking when it comes to Lamar Jackson. What should the Jets do? Well, if you've been a long-time listener, if you've been listening the last couple of months, my skepticism about Aaron Rodgers right now. If Aaron Rodgers was 5 years younger, if Aaron Rodgers was not going to cost premium draft picks, if Aaron Rodgers did not have a $60 million salary next year, or if I felt like it was likely they would be able to reduce that in an appreciable way, my opinion would be very different. I mean, I still wonder whether I'm making the right call when I express skepticism about the Jets potentially making a move for Aaron Rodgers. But I can't look past these two numbers. You got 40 and you got 26. And that's what I go back to when I say if Rodgers was 5 years younger, if Rodgers was 2 years younger, if I knew I was getting 4 to 5 years out of Aaron Rodgers, no-brainer. But one of the challenges with Rodgers probably only playing 2 years, and I think, if you look at his contract, and also if you look at his age, I don't think that the Tom Brady scenario, I think Tom Brady has kind of distorted our perceptions about a realistic aging curve for quarterbacks. And I understand that it's a different era where quarterbacks really can't even be touched these days, and maybe that makes life easier, but I've seen a lot of really good quarterbacks still decline in their late 30s, early 40s. If you gave me Aaron Rodgers for 15 years, I feel pretty confident I'm winning at least one Super Bowl, if not two. If you gave him to me for 7 years, I'd take my chances. Even if you gave me for 5 years, I'd take my chances. But I think asking a team in any scenario to win a Super Bowl in the next 2 years, it's a lot to ask. But beyond that, almost every good player outside of DJ Reed on the Jets right now is 24 or younger. I mean, this is a team with a young core, and for the first time in a while, it feels like a team with a young core on the rise. So do you really want to take that many resources down the road to get Aaron Rodgers when you could potentially get a 26-year-old quarterback to go with all this young talent you've got? A group that could grow together, that could be together for a long time, that could give you many, many chances. I can understand why people want Aaron Rodgers, but if I'm comparing right now Aaron Rodgers with the opportunity to get Lamar Jackson, to me, Lamar Jackson's a much better fit. But, if you want Aaron Rodgers, I think the Jets agree with you more, because it certainly seems like the Jets are putting the full court press on Aaron Rodgers. And by all accounts, they're only going to be interested in Lamar Jackson in an event that they've struck out on Rodgers and Jackson's still available. It seems like it's not just that Rodgers is their first choice. It seems like right now Rodgers is the only choice for the New York Jets, that they are putting everything else on hold. And even if other guys go off the board right now, their focus is primarily on Aaron Rodgers. And we'll see what happens in the days ahead. Part of this is going to depend on how these Tuesday meetings turn out, and how good of a sales job the Jets do. We'll be waiting to find out, but that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source, please give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. These things help the podcast out and help other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Have a great Tuesday, everybody. Send in your mailbag questions. We'll probably have our mailbag tomorrow unless there's big news at the quarterback front. Take care until then.